I sat behind the wheel, staring at the dashboard, and let the tears come. Not loud sobs, just quiet, choking ones that burned my throat. I was 34 years old, starting over with nothing but a rented apartment, a stack of bills, and a name that felt like it belonged to someone else. That night, I sat cross legged on the floor of my new place, a one bedroom with peeling paint and a window that rattled when the wind blew. The bills were spread out in front of me like a map of my failure. $23,000 in credit card debt, $7,500 in medical bills from Greg's business trip accident, and a car loan that was 3 months behind. I could still hear his voice, smooth as ever, promising we'd pay it all off together. "Trust me, Rach," he'd said, flashing that smile that made everyone believe him. I had. And now here I was, alone, with his promises turned to ash. I don't know why I didn't break that night. Maybe it was the memory of my dad, sitting at our old kitchen table when I was 9, his hands rough from years of construction work. "Life's gonna knock you down, kid," he'd said, peeling an orange with his pocket knife. "But you don't stay down. You get up and you build something better." I could still smell the citrus, sharp and bright, mixing with the coffee he drank black. That memory was a lifeline, pulling me back from the edge. The next morning, I made a decision. I wasn't going to be the victim in this story. I wasn't going to let Greg's betrayal define me. I'd been a financial analyst before we got married, before I let his dreams swallow mine. I was good at it, damn good. I knew numbers, markets, how to spot opportunities others missed. If I was going to climb out of this hole, I'd do it my way. Dash, dash, dash. The first year was brutal. I took a job at a mid-sized firm in downtown Atlanta, crunching numbers for clients who barely knew my name. The pay was decent, but every cent went to bills or the tiny savings account I'd started. I lived on instant noodles and coffee, the kind that came in a tin and tasted like regret. My apartment stayed bare, a secondhand couch, a wobbly table, a mattress on the floor. I didn't care. Comfort could wait. I was building something. Lisa Monroe, my best friend since college, was the only one who didn't treat me like a cautionary tale. She'd show up at my place with takeout, her blonde hair pulled into a messy bun, her laugh loud enough to drown out my doubts. "You're a badass, Rachel," she'd say, tossing me a carton of lo mein. "Greg's gonna choke on his own ego when he sees what you do next." Lisa had her own consulting business, small but growing, and she kept nudging me to join her. "We'd kill it together," she said. I wasn't ready yet, but her belief in me was like a spark in the dark. Work became my refuge. I'd stay late, long after the office emptied out, the hum of the air conditioning my only company. I'd pore over market trends, financial reports, anything that could give me an edge. I started taking online courses at night, brushing up on skills I'd let rust during my marriage. I barely slept, but I didn't feel tired. There was a fire in me, quiet but steady, and it grew with every small win. A paid-off credit card, a client's praise, a new connection at a networking event. I'd see Greg's life unfolding on Instagram, even though I tried not to look. He was always posing in some bar or at a business meeting with a glass of whiskey and a woman half his age. His captions were full of words like hustle and success, but I knew better. I'd seen the real numbers during our marriage, the failed ventures, the loans he'd never repaid. He was a mirage, all flash and no substance. Still, it stung. Not because I wanted him back, but because he'd walked away without a scratch while I was still bleeding. One night, after a particularly long day, I sat on my couch with a glass of cheap wine staring at the wall. I thought about my mom, who died when I was 22. She'd been a nurse, tough but kind, always humming old jazz songs while she cooked. "You've got her eyes," Dad used to say, meaning the green ones that seemed to see through people. I wondered what Mom would think of me now, scraping by, fighting for a second chance. I could almost hear her voice, soft but firm. "Keep going, baby. You're stronger than you know." By the second year, things started to shift. I'd paid off half the debt and my savings account wasn't so pathetic anymore. Lisa finally convinced me to join her business and we started pitching to bigger clients. We worked out of a tiny office with mismatched chairs and a coffee machine that groaned like it was dying, but it felt like home. Our first big contract came from a chain of local restaurants looking to streamline their finances. I built a plan that saved them thousands, and word started to spread. Soon, we were getting calls from companies I'd only dreamed of working with. I moved into a better apartment, one with actual sunlight and a balcony where I could sip coffee and watch the sunrise. It wasn't fancy, but it was mine. I started to feel like myself again. Not the Rachel who'd been Greg's wife, but the Rachel who'd once had dreams of her own. I cut my auburn hair into a sleek bob, a small rebellion against the long waves Greg had loved. I liked the way it made me look sharp, like someone who meant business. Then came the opportunity that changed everything. Lisa and I were at a conference when we met Mr. Peterson, a soft spoken man in his 60s who owned a small bank on the outskirts of Atlanta. He was looking to retire and sell, but he wanted someone who'd keep the bank's community roots intact. I don't know why he took a shine to me. Maybe he saw the hunger in my eyes, but we stayed in touch. Over coffee meetings and late night emails, he walked me through the acquisition process. It was a long shot, but I couldn't shake the feeling that this was my moment. I threw everything into it. Lisa and I pooled our savings, took out loans, and worked around the clock to make the numbers add up. There were nights when I'd lie awake, my heart pounding, wondering if I was crazy to think I could pull this off. But every time I doubted myself, I'd think of Greg's voice calling me dead weight during our last fight. That memory was like a knife, and it cut through my fear. When the deal closed, I didn't celebrate. I just sat in my new office, the one with a view of the parking lot and a desk that smelled faintly of polish, and let out a long breath. I was 36 years old, and I owned a bank. The weight of it didn't hit me until later, when Lisa dragged me out for drinks and raised a glass. To Rachel Adams, she said, her eyes shining, the woman who turned ashes into gold. 3 weeks later, I was in the branch manager's office reviewing loan applications. The stack was thick, each one a story of hope or desperation. I was halfway through when a name caught my eye: Gregory Adams. My blood ran cold, then hot, like a wave crashing over me. I read the application twice, my hand steady but my pulse racing. He was asking for $50,000 to save his latest venture, a bar that was bleeding money faster than he could pour drinks. The branch manager, a nervous man named Tom, cleared his throat. He's been very persistent, he said. Keeps asking to speak directly to the owner. I leaned back in my chair, my fingers brushing the edge of the desk. For a moment, I saw myself 2 years ago, sitting on that apartment floor, drowning in his debts. Then I saw my dad, peeling that orange, telling me to build something better. A slow, grim smile spread across my face. Schedule him in, I said. I'll handle it personally. The day of Greg's appointment, I woke up before dawn. My apartment was quiet, the only sound the faint hum of the refrigerator. I stood on my balcony, clutching a mug of coffee, watching the sky turn from indigo to soft pink. The air smelled of dew and cut grass, a reminder of the mornings I'd spent as a kid, sitting on the porch with my mom while she braided my hair. "You're going to do big things, Rachel," she'd say, her fingers gentle but sure. I wondered if she'd imagined this moment. Me, standing on the edge of something I'd built from nothing, about to face the man who'd tried to break me. I dressed carefully that morning. A tailored black blazer, a crisp white blouse, a pencil skirt that hugged my hips. My auburn bob was sleek, my green eyes sharp in the mirror. I didn't want to look like the Rachel Gregg remembered, the one who'd cried herself to sleep after his betrayal. I wanted to look like power, like someone who'd rewritten her own story. The bank was a 20-minute drive, past suburban strip malls and oak-lined streets. I parked in my reserved spot, the one with my name on a small plaque, and felt a flicker of pride. Inside, the air was cool, smelling of paper and faint lemon polish. My office was on the second floor, a corner room with floor-to-ceiling windows that let in streams of morning light. I sat behind my desk, the wood smooth under my fingers, and waited. Greg was scheduled for 10 a.m., but he was late. Of course he was. He'd always been late, always kept people waiting, as if his time was worth more than theirs. At 10:15, my assistant buzzed me. "Mr. Adams is here," she said, her voice neutral but curious. I took a slow breath, steadying myself, and nodded even though she couldn't see me. "Send him in." The door opened, and there he was. Tall, broad-shouldered, with that same easy swagger that had charmed me a decade ago. His suit was new, but it didn't fit quite right, the jacket a touch too tight across his shoulders. His smile faltered when he saw me, his eyes widening, then narrowing, like he was trying to solve a puzzle. For a moment, we just stared at each other, the air thick with unspoken history. "Rachel," he said finally, his voice caught between surprise and something else. Panic, maybe. He recovered quickly, flashing that smile, the one that used to make my knees weak. I didn't know you worked here. I didn't answer right away. I leaned back in my chair, letting the silence stretch, letting him feel the weight of it. His application was open on my desk, the pages neatly aligned. I tapped it once, twice, with the tip of my pen. I don't work here, Greg, I said, my voice calm, almost soft. I own it. His smile froze, then cracked. He shifted his weight, one hand smoothing his tie, a nervous habit I remembered from our marriage. You own it? He repeated, like he was testing the words, hoping they'd change. I nodded just once and watched the realization hit him. His shoulders slumped just a fraction, but it was enough. For the first time in years, I saw him without the mask, raw, exposed, a man who'd gambled and lost Dot. He sat down without being invited, his movements jerky like a puppet with half its strings cut. Look, Rachel, he started, his voice low, coaxing, the way it always was when he wanted something. I know things ended badly between us, but I'm in a tough spot. This bar, it's a sure thing. I just need a little help to get it off the ground. You know I'm good for it. I let him talk, my face neutral, my hands still. He went on about the bar, the investors he was close to signing, the vision he had. It was the same pitch I'd heard 100 times during our marriage, polished but hollow, like a song played on repeat until the notes lose meaning. I thought about the nights I'd stayed up balancing our checkbook while he was out networking, the promises he'd made and broken, the way he'd looked at me when he left, like I was the one who'd failed him. When he finally stopped, the room was quiet. The only sound, the faint tick of the clock on the wall. I flipped open his application, scanning the numbers I already knew by heart. Overdue loans, maxed out credit cards, a credit score that was more warning than promise. I closed the file and looked at him. Really looked. At the lines around his eyes, the slight tremor in his hands. He wasn't the man I'd married, not anymore. Maybe he never had been. I think you'll find we're looking for applicants with a history of reliability, I said, my voice steady, almost kind. I reached for the stamp on my desk, the one that said asterisk asterisk rejected asterisk asterisk in bold red letters, and pressed it onto his application with a soft thud. The sound was small, but it echoed in my chest like a gunshot. Greg's face went slack, then red. Rachel, come on, he said, leaning forward, his voice rising. You can't do this. You owe me. I don't owe you anything. I cut in, my tone sharp now, like a blade I'd been sharpening for years. You made your choices, Greg. Live with them. He stared at me, his mouth opening and closing, searching for words that wouldn't come. Finally, he stood, his chair scraping against the floor. He tried to muster that swagger again, but it was gone, replaced by something small and broken. He walked out without another word, the door clicking shut behind him. I sat there for a long time, staring at the closed door, my coffee cooling in its mug. The sunlight slanted across my desk, catching flecks of dust in the air. I should have felt triumphant, but I didn't. There was a hollowness in my chest, a quiet ache. Revenge wasn't as sweet as I'd imagined. Not because I regretted it, but because it didn't erase the years of pain. It didn't bring back the woman I'd been before Greg, the one who'd trusted too easily, loved too fiercely. I was still lost in thought when my assistant buzzed again. Rachel, you have another visitor, she said, her voice hesitant. It's someone else from your past. My hand froze above the paperwork, my heart stuttering. I thought of the people I'd left behind in the wreckage of my marriage. Friends who'd drifted away. Family I hadn't called in years. Who else could it be showing up now, when I'd finally started to feel steady? I straightened in my chair, smoothing my blazer, and took a deep breath. Send them in, I said, my voice calmer than I felt. The door opened, and in walked my father. He looked older than I remembered, his hair more silver than brown, his shoulders stooped from years of hard labor. But his eyes, green like mine, were as sharp as ever, crinkling at the corners when he saw me. Hey, kid, he said, his voice rough but warm, like gravel smoothed by a river. He stood there, holding a paper bag that smelled faintly of oranges, and for a moment, I was 9 years old again, sitting at that kitchen table, watching him peel fruit with his pocket knife. Dad, I said, my voice catching. I stood, my legs unsteady, and crossed the room to hug him. His arms were strong, familiar, smelling of sawdust and aftershave. I hadn't seen him in over a year, not since I'd moved to Atlanta and let shame keep me from calling. I'd told myself I didn't want to burden him, but the truth was I hadn't wanted him to see me broken dot. He pulled back, holding me at arm's length, his eyes searching mine. Heard you bought a bank? He said, a grin tugging at his mouth. Figured I'd come see it for myself. I laughed, a shaky sound, and led him to the chair across from my desk. He sat down, setting the bag of oranges on the floor, and for a moment, we just looked at each other. I wanted to tell him everything: the divorce, the debt, the nights I'd almost given up. But he already knew. I could see it in the way he watched me, proud but worried, like he'd been carrying my pain all along. You did good, Rachel, he said finally, his voice soft. Your mom would have been proud. The mention of her hit me like a wave, and I blinked back tears. I thought of her humming in the kitchen, her hands quick and sure, her laugh that could light up a room. I wanted to tell him how much I missed her, how much I'd needed her these past few years. Instead, I reached for an orange from the bag, rolling it between my palms, the scent sharp and bright. Dad, I said, my voice barely above a whisper, how do you let go of the hurt? He leaned back, his hands resting on his knees, and thought for a moment. You don't, he said. Not really. You just keep building, keep moving, until the hurt's just a small part of a bigger story. I nodded, the weight of his words settling into me. I looked out the window, at the parking lot bathed in midday sun, and felt something shift. Not closure exactly, but a kind of peace. Fragile but real. Greg was gone, his shadow smaller now, and I was still here, standing tall in a life I'd built from the ground up. Dot the orange rested heavy in my hand, its rough skin cool against my palm. I set it on the desk next to Greg's rejected application and looked at my dad. His face was weathered, etched with lines that told stories of long days and longer nights, but there was a softness in his eyes that made me feel safe, like I could still be his little girl, even after everything. The clock on the wall ticked softly, marking the seconds, and outside the hum of traffic filtered through the glass. I wanted to freeze this moment, to hold on to the quiet strength of his presence before the world rushed back in. How'd you know I was here? I asked, my voice low, almost afraid to break the spell. Dad chuckled, a deep rumbling sound that reminded me of summer evenings on our old porch swing. Lisa, he said, leaning back in the chair. She called me a few weeks ago, said you were doing big things, said you might need a reminder of where you came from. He paused, his gaze drifting to the orange on my desk. She's a good friend, that one. I smiled, a warmth spreading in my chest. Lisa had always been my anchor, the one who'd seen me at my worst and never flinched. I made a mental note to thank her later, maybe drag her out for wine and tell her how much she meant to me, but for now, I was here, with my dad, in an office that still felt like a dream. We talked for a while about small things at first: his garden, the tomatoes he was proud of, the stray cat that kept showing up at his back door. He told me about the construction job he'd finally retired from, how he spent his days now fixing up the house he and Mom had bought when I was born. Needs a new roof, he said, shaking his head, but I'm too stubborn to hire someone. I could picture him up there, hammer in hand, squinting against the sun, just like he'd been when I was a kid, building me a tree house in the backyard. That memory came back sharp and vivid, the smell of sawdust, the creak of the ladder, the way he'd let me hold the nails, my small hands trembling with importance. This is yours, Rachel, he'd said, wiping sweat from his brow. A place to dream big. I'd spent hours in that treehouse, reading books, sketching plans for a future I couldn't yet see. I wondered what that girl would think of me now, sitting behind this desk, owning a bank, carrying scars she couldn't have imagined. Dad, I said, my voice catching. I'm sorry I didn't call more. After the divorce, I didn't want you to see me like that. He leaned forward, his hands clasped, his eyes steady on mine. I saw you, kid, he said. Every time I looked at you, I saw my daughter fighting like hell to get back up. You don't have to hide from me. The words hit me harder than I expected, cracking open something I'd kept locked away. I blinked, my vision blurring, and reached for the orange again just to have something to hold on to. The scent was sharp, grounding, pulling me back to those kitchen mornings with him and Mom, when life was simple and the future felt like a promise. I wanted to tell him how much I'd missed him, how his voice on the phone had been a lifeline during those first lonely months after Greg left. But I didn't. I just nodded, my throat tight, and let the silence say what I couldn't. He stayed for another hour and telling stories, making me laugh until my sides ached. When he stood to leave, he hugged me again, his arms strong and sure. You come by the house soon, he said, his voice gruff. I'll make you dinner. Nothing fancy, just spaghetti. I promised I would, and as I watched him walk out, the paper bag of oranges tucked under his arm, I felt a quiet ache. Not sadness exactly, but a longing for the years we'd lost, the ones I couldn't get back. Dot dash dash dash. The rest of the day passed in a blur. I met with Tom, the branch manager, to go over the next quarter's goals. I signed off on a few small loans, each one a step toward keeping the bank's community roots alive, just like Mr. Peterson had wanted. But my mind kept drifting back to Greg, to the look on his face when I'd stamped his application, to my dad's voice saying, "You just keep building." I wondered if I'd done the right thing, rejecting Greg's loan. Not because I doubted his inability to pay it back, his track record was proof enough, but because I wasn't sure what I'd been trying to prove. Was it revenge, or was it just me refusing to let him drag me down again? That night, I drove home under a sky streaked with gold and purple, the kind of sunset that makes you feel small and infinite at the same time. My apartment was quiet, the balcony doors open to let in the evening breeze. I poured a glass of wine and kicked off my heels and sat on the couch, staring at the orange I'd brought home from the office. It was just a piece of fruit, but it felt like more, a tether to my past, a reminder of who I'd been and who I was becoming. I thought about calling Lisa, but instead I pulled out my laptop and opened an old photo album I hadn't looked at in years. There we were, me and Greg, young and smiling, standing on a beach in Savannah. I was 25, my hair long and wavy, my eyes bright with hope. He had his arm around me, his grin wide, like he'd just won the lottery. I remembered that trip, how we'd stayed up all night talking about our future: kids, a house, a life we'd build together. I'd believed him then, believed in us. Now looking at that photo, I felt a pang of grief. Not for him, but for the girl I'd been, the one who'd trusted so completely. I scrolled through more photos, me and Lisa at graduation. Both of us in caps and gowns, laughing like the world was ours. Me and Mom in the kitchen, flour on our cheeks from baking Christmas cookies. Me and Dad in the treehouse, my gap-toothed smile beaming as he handed me a hammer. Each image was a piece of me, a reminder that I was more than the pain Greg had left behind. I closed the laptop, my chest tight, and sipped my wine, letting the memories settle. Dot dash dash dash. The next morning, I was back at the bank, a fresh cup of coffee in hand, the orange sitting on my desk like a talisman. The day was busy: meetings, emails, a call with a potential investor. But I felt steadier, like I'd found my footing again. Around noon, Lisa stopped by, her blonde hair pulled back, her eyes sparkling with mischief. "So," she said, dropping into the chair across from me, "how'd it feel to crush Greg's dreams?" I laughed, shaking my head. "It wasn't like that," I said, though part of me wondered if it was. I told her about the meeting, about the stamp, about the way he'd looked when he left. I told her about Dad, too, and the oranges, and the way his words had anchored me. She listened, her face softening, and when I finished, she reached across the desk and squeezed my hand. "You're a force, Rachel," she said. "Don't ever forget that." We talked business after that, going over a new client pitch, but her words stayed with me. A force. I liked the sound of it, the weight of it. I'd spent so long feeling like a victim, like life was something that happened to me. Now I was the one making things happen, shaping my own story. That afternoon, I got a call from Mr. Peterson. His voice was warm, crackling slightly over the line. "Just checking in," he said. "Wanted to see how my bank's doing in your hands." I smiled, picturing him in his cozy office surrounded by photos of his grandkids. I told him about the loans we'd approved, the community programs we were starting, the plans for expansion. He listened, humming approvingly. And when I was done, he said, "You're doing it right, Rachel. You're building something real." His words echoed Dad's, and I felt a surge of pride, mixed with something softer like gratitude. I thought about the years ahead and the challenges, the victories. I thought about the bank, this small piece of Atlanta that was mine to shape. And I thought about Greg, somewhere out there, chasing his next big scheme, unaware that I'd already won. As I hung up, the sunlight streamed through the windows, catching the orange on my desk. I picked it up, rolling it between my palms, and smiled. The hurt was still there, a quiet shadow, but it was smaller now, dwarfed by the life I was building. I didn't need to let it go, not completely. I just needed to keep moving, keep growing, until it was just a footnote in a much bigger story. The orange sat on my desk all week, a quiet reminder of Dad's visit, of the roots that kept me grounded. By Friday, the bank was humming with its usual rhythm, tellers chatting with customers, the soft clack of keyboards, the occasional ring of a phone. I was in my office reviewing a report on small business loans when Tom knocked on the doorframe. His tie was slightly crooked, his glasses slipping down his nose, but his expression was serious, almost cautious. "Rachel," he said, stepping inside, "there's something you should know about Greg Adams." I looked up, my pen pausing mid-sentence. The sound of Greg's name still sent a jolt through me, though it was less sharp now, more like a dull ache. "What about him?" I asked, keeping my voice even. Not. Tom hesitated, glancing at the folder in his hand. "He came back this morning, tried to apply for another loan, different amount, different business plan. I told him we couldn't process it, not after, well, you know." He shifted his weight, clearly uncomfortable. He got loud, caused a bit of a scene, said he'd take it to the top, demanded to see the owner again. I leaned back in my chair, my fingers brushing the edge of the orange. For a moment, I was back in that meeting, watching Greg's face crumble as I stamped his application. I'd thought that was the end of it, that he'd slink away, tail between his legs. But Greg was never one to give up easily, not when his pride was on the line. I should have known he'd come back, trying to rewrite the story, to make himself the hero again. "Did he say anything else?" I asked, my voice calm but my mind racing. Tom nodded, flipping open the folder. "He left this." He slid a single sheet of paper across my desk, a handwritten note scrawled in Greg's familiar, messy handwriting. I picked it up, my eyes scanning the words. Asterisk Rachel. "You think you've won, but this isn't over. I know things about this bank. About you. Don't push me. Asterisk." The words hit like a cold wind, chilling me despite the sunlight streaming through the windows. I read the note again, slower this time, searching for the threat beneath the bravado. Asterisk, I know things. What did that even mean? Greg was a bluffer, always had been. But there was something desperate in his tone, something that made my stomach twist. I thought of the bank's records, the loans, the clients, everything I'd worked so hard to build. Could he really have something, some piece of dirt from our marriage, some leverage I hadn't anticipated? "Rachel." Tom's voice pulled me back. "What do you want to do?" I set the note down, my hands steady despite the storm in my chest. "Nothing for now," I said. "If he comes back, don't engage. Just call me." Tom nodded, clearly relieved, and left me alone with the note and my thoughts. I sat there for a long time, staring at the paper, my coffee growing cold. The office was quiet, the only sound the faint hum of the air conditioning. I thought about the early days of our marriage when Greg and I would stay up late, dreaming about the future. He'd talk about his big ideas: restaurants, tech startups, real estate deals, while I'd crunch the numbers, trying to make his dreams fit reality. I'd believed in him then, believed in asterisk us asterisk. But somewhere along the way, his dreams became excuses, and my trust became a liability. I remembered one night, maybe 5 years ago, when we'd fought about money. I was at the kitchen table, bills spread out like a battlefield while he paced, his voice loud, accusing. "You're holding me back, Rachel," he'd said, his eyes hard. "You're too cautious, too small-minded." I'd sat there, stunned, my hands shaking as I clutched a pen. That was the first time I'd seen the real Greg, the one who'd turn on me when things got tough. I should have left then, but I didn't. I stayed, thinking I could fix it, thinking love was enough. Now, sitting in my office, I realized love hadn't been enough. Not for him, and maybe not for me either. What had saved me wasn't love, but grit, the kind my parents had taught me. I thought of Mom, her hands quick and sure as she bandaged a neighbor's kid, her voice calm even in chaos. I thought of Dad, his calloused fingers peeling that orange, his quiet faith in me. They'd given me the tools to rebuild, to turn pain into power. Greg's note, his threats, they were just noise, the last gasp of a man who'd lost control. Still, I couldn't shake the unease. I called Lisa, needing her no-nonsense clarity. She picked up on the second ring, her voice bright. "Hey, boss lady, what's up?" I told her about Greg's visit, the note, the vague threat. She listened, her silence thoughtful, and when I finished, she let out a low whistle. "He's grasping at straws," she said. "But you need to cover your bases. Check the bank's records, make sure everything's clean, and maybe talk to a lawyer just in case. I nodded even though she couldn't see me. Already on it, I said. But Lisa, what if he does know something? Something from before when we were married? She snorted, a sound so familiar it made me smile. Rachel, that man doesn't know his ass from his elbow. He's bluffing, trying to scare you. Don't let him back in your head. Her words were like a lifeline, pulling me out of the spiral. We talked for a few more minutes about work, about the new client we were pitching next week. When I hung up, I felt steadier, ready to face whatever Greg thought he could throw at me. Dot, dash, dash, dash. That evening, I stayed late at the bank, long after the staff had gone home. The building was quiet, the only light coming from my desk lamp and the soft glow of my computer screen. I went through the bank's records, line by line, checking for anything that could be used against me. It was tedious work, but it grounded me. The numbers, a language I understood. Everything was clean. Mr. Peterson had run a tight ship, and I'd made sure to keep it that way. Dot. As I worked, my mind wandered to a memory I hadn't thought of in years. I was 12, maybe 13, sitting in the back seat of Dad's old pickup, the one that smelled of motor oil and pine air freshener. We were driving home from a fishing trip, the windows down, the air warm and thick with summer. I'd caught my first fish that day, a small trout that flopped wildly until Dad showed me how to hold it. "You're tougher than you think, kid," he'd said, his voice proud. I could still feel the weight of that fish, the thrill of it, the way Dad's hand rested on my shoulder as we drove home, singing along to some old country song. Dot. That memory felt like a gift now, a reminder of my own strength. I finished the records around midnight, satisfied that Greg had nothing to hold over me. I locked up the office, the orange still on my desk, and drove home under a sky full of stars. My apartment was dark, but I didn't turn on the lights. I stood on the balcony, the breeze cool against my skin, and let the quiet sink in. Dot. The next morning, I called a lawyer, a sharp woman named Carla, who Lisa had worked with before. I told her about Greg, the note, the history. She listened, her voice calm but firm, and promised to look into it. "He's probably just posturing," she said, echoing Lisa, "but we'll make sure you're protected." I thanked her and hung up, feeling a weight lift. Greg could try to rattle me, but I wasn't the woman he'd left behind. I was Rachel Adams, owner of a bank, daughter of a man who'd taught me to build, a woman who'd turned ashes into something solid. His threats were just shadows, and I'd learned to walk through shadows without flinching. Dot, dash, dash, dash. A week later, I was in a meeting with Tom and the loan officers when my assistant buzzed me. "There's a delivery for you," she said, her voice curious. I excused myself and stepped into the lobby, where a courier handed me a small package. It was light, wrapped in plain brown paper, with my name written in careful script. I opened it in my office, my heart pounding for reasons I couldn't name. Dot inside was a single photograph, old and faded, the edges curling. It was me and Greg, standing in front of our first apartment, our arms around each other, smiling like the world was ours. On the back in Greg's handwriting were two words: asterisk. Remember this? I stared at the photo, my breath catching. It wasn't a threat, not exactly, but it was something worse. A reminder of the life we'd shared, the dreams I'd buried. For a moment, I was back in that apartment, cooking dinner while Greg spun stories about our future. I could smell the garlic, hear his laugh, feel the hope that had kept me tethered to him. Dot. Then I set the photo down, my hands steady. That life was gone, and I wasn't that woman anymore. I didn't know what Greg was playing at, but I wouldn't let him pull me back. I tucked the photo into a drawer next to the orange and went back to my meeting, my steps firm, my heart resolute. Dot. The photograph stayed in my drawer, tucked away like a secret I wasn't ready to face. I didn't tell Lisa about it, or Dad, or even Carla, my lawyer. It felt too personal, too raw, like a wound that hadn't fully healed. Every time I opened the drawer to grab a pen or a file, my eyes would catch the edge of it, and I'd feel a tug in my chest, a mix of nostalgia and anger, longing and resolve. I told myself it didn't matter, that Greg was just trying to get under my skin. But the truth was, it worked, if only a little. Dot. The days that followed were busy, the kind of busy that swallows you whole and leaves no room for doubt. I met with clients, approved a new community outreach program, and spent late nights with Lisa, hammering out a proposal for a major retailer. The bank was thriving, and so was I, at least on the surface. My office became my sanctuary, the orange on my desk a quiet talisman, the sunlight through the windows a reminder that I'd built this life from the ground up. But at night, when the world was quiet, I'd lie awake. The photograph's weight lingering like a shadow dot. One evening, after a long day, I drove to Dad's house. He'd been texting me all week, gentle nudges about that spaghetti dinner he'd promised. I hadn't seen him since his visit to the bank, and the thought of his warm, cluttered kitchen felt like a balm. The drive was familiar, past the old gas station where I'd bought Slurpees as a kid, past the park where Mom used to push me on the swings. Atlanta had changed, but these streets hadn't, and they carried me back to a time when life was simpler, when trust came easy. Dad's house was a small ranch style, the paint peeling in places, the front yard dotted with tomato plants he'd staked with care. I parked in the driveway, the gravel crunching under my tires, and saw him on the porch, a glass of iced tea in his hand. He waved, his grin wide, and I felt my shoulders relax, the tension of the week melting away. "About time you showed up," he said as I climbed the steps. His voice was teasing, but his eyes were soft, searching, like he could see the weight I was carrying. I hugged him, breathing in the familiar scent of sawdust and soap, and followed him inside. The kitchen smelled of garlic and basil, the air warm from the stove. Dad had set the table with mismatched plates, the ones Mom had loved, each one a different color from thrift store finds. A pot of spaghetti bubbled on the burner, and a loaf of crusty bread sat on the counter, sliced unevenly the way he always did it. I smiled, settling into a chair, and watched him move around the kitchen with the ease of someone who'd done this 1,000 times. We talked about small things at first: his garden, the cat he'd named Rusty, the neighbor who kept borrowing his lawnmower. But as we ate, the conversation turned deeper, the way it always did with him. I told him about the bank, the new programs, the way it felt to see my name on that plaque in the parking lot, but I didn't mention Greg or the note or the photograph, but I think he sensed it, the way parents always do. "You look tired, kid," he said, pushing a plate of bread toward me. Not just work tired, something else. I hesitated, twirling spaghetti around my fork. The kitchen was quiet, the only sound the faint hum of the fridge and the distant chirp of crickets outside. I wanted to brush it off, to say I was fine, but his eyes were steady, patient, and I felt the words spill out before I could stop them. "Greg's been stirring things up," I said, my voice low. I told him about the second loan application, the note, the photograph. I told him how it felt to see that old picture, to remember the girl I'd been, the one who'd believed in forever. Dad listened, his hands folded on the table, his face unreadable but kind. When I finished, he leaned back, sipping his tea. "Sounds like he's scared," he said finally. "Man like that, he's used to controlling the story. Now you're the one writing it, and he can't stand it," I nodded, the truth of his words settling into me. Greg had always needed to be the center, the star of his own show. My success, my strength, it was a mirror he couldn't face. The note, the photograph, they weren't about hurting me, not really. They were about him, grasping for control, for relevance. "Doesn't make it easier," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "Seeing that photo, it's like seeing a ghost." Dad reached across the table, his hand covering mine. His skin was rough, calloused from years of work, but his touch was gentle. "Ghosts don't own you, Rachel," he said. "You decide what to do with them." I looked at him, at the lines around his eyes, the silver in his hair, and felt a surge of gratitude. He'd lost Mom, lost years to grief, but he was still here, still building, still showing me how to do the same. I squeezed his hand, my throat tight, and we sat there for a moment, the weight of the past and the promise of the future mingling in the air. Dash, dash, dash. The next morning, I woke up in my old bedroom, the one Dad had kept mostly unchanged. The walls were still pale blue, the shelves lined with books and trophies from high school. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, listening to the birds outside, and felt a clarity I hadn't in weeks. Greg's photograph wasn't a weapon unless I let it be. It was just a piece of paper, a moment frozen in time. I wasn't that girl anymore, and I didn't have to carry her pain. Back at the bank, I threw myself into work with a renewed focus. I met with Carla, who'd found nothing in Greg's threats. No legal standing, no real leverage. "He's fishing," she said, her voice crisp. "If he tries anything, we'll shut it down." I thanked her, feeling the last of my unease dissolve. Lisa stopped by that afternoon, her energy bright as ever, and we spent hours brainstorming new ideas for the bank: a financial literacy program for local schools, a partnership with small businesses. It felt good to create, to build something bigger than myself. That evening, I took the photograph out of the drawer. I sat at my desk, the office quiet, the orange glowing faintly in the lamplight. I studied the picture, really looked at it, at the way Greg's arm rested on my shoulder, at the hope in my eyes. I didn't feel anger anymore or sadness, just a quiet acceptance. That moment was part of my story, but it wasn't the whole of it. I tore the photo in half, then again, and dropped the pieces into the trash. It wasn't dramatic, just necessary, like pruning a plant to let it grow. Weeks turned into months, and Greg faded into the background, a footnote in a life that was expanding every day. The bank grew, our programs took root, and I started to see the impact in small, beautiful ways. A single mom who got a loan to start her bakery, a teenager who learned to balance a budget through our classes. I hired more staff, including a young woman named Mia who reminded me of myself at 25, sharp, hungry, ready to prove herself. I mentored her the way Mr. Peterson had mentored me, and it felt like closing a circle. One Saturday, I drove to Dad's for another dinner, this time bringing Lisa along. We sat in the backyard under a sky turning pink and gold, eating spaghetti and laughing until our sides hurt. Dad told stories about Mom, about the time she'd burned a cake and tried to hide it by covering it with frosting. Lisa teased me about my high school prom dress, a puffy monstrosity I'd thought was glamorous. I looked at them, at the people who'd carried me through, and felt a peace I hadn't known I was searching for. As we cleared the dishes, Dad pulled me aside, his voice low. "You're doing all right, kid," he said, his eyes crinkling. "Better than all right." I hugged him, my heart full, and thought of Mom, of the way she'd hum in the kitchen, her love woven into every note. I carried her with me, and Dad, and every hard-won lesson of the past few years. Driving home that night, the windows down, the air warm and sweet, I thought about Greg, about the photograph, about the woman I'd been. I didn't hate him anymore, didn't need to. He was a chapter, not the book. My story was still unfolding page by page, and I was the one holding the pen. The road stretched ahead, lit by the glow of a city I'd made my own, and I smiled, ready for whatever came next. The summer faded into fall, and Atlanta took on that crisp, golden hue that always felt like a fresh start. The trees along Peachtree Street turned shades of amber and red, their leaves drifting onto the sidewalks like confetti. I'd always loved this time of year, the way the air smelled of wood smoke and possibility, the way it reminded me of childhood walks with Mom, crunching through piles of leaves while she told me stories about her nursing days. Now, as I drove to the bank each morning, I felt that same sense of renewal, like the world was opening up, inviting me to keep building. The bank was busier than ever. Our financial literacy program had taken off, with local high schools inviting us to teach workshops on budgeting and credit. I'd sit in the back of those classrooms sometimes, watching Mia lead the sessions, her voice confident as she explained interest rates to a room full of skeptical teenagers. She had a knack for making numbers feel alive, and I saw myself in her. The younger me, the one who'd stayed up late studying finance, dreaming of a career that would matter. I'd catch her eye during those moments, and she'd flash me a grin, like she knew we were part of something bigger. Lisa and I were working on a new project, too, a partnership with a nonprofit that helped women rebuild after domestic violence or financial ruin. It was personal for me, though I didn't say it out loud. Every time we met with the nonprofit's director, a no-nonsense woman named Karen, I thought about the nights I'd spent on that apartment floor drowning in Greg's debts. I wanted to give other women what I'd fought for, a second chance, a way out. Karen would talk about her clients, their stories of survival, and I'd feel a quiet fire in my chest, a reminder of why I kept going. One afternoon, as I was leaving a meeting with Karen, my phone buzzed with a text from Dad. Asterisk, got a surprise for you. Come by tonight. I smiled, picturing him in his backyard, probably showing off a new tomato plant or some gadget he'd found at a garage sale. I texted back, promising to be there, and drove to the bank with a lightness I hadn't felt in weeks. But the day took a turn I didn't expect. Tom caught me in the hallway, his face tense, a manila envelope in his hand. "Rachel, this came for you," he said, his voice low. It's from Greg Adams. My stomach dropped, the lightness gone. I took the envelope, my fingers brushing the rough paper, and thanked Tom with a nod. Back in my office, I closed the door and sat at my desk. The orange still there, its color faded, but steady. The envelope was unmarked, no return address, just my name and Greg's handwriting, sharper this time, like he'd pressed the pen too hard. I opened it, my heart pounding, and pulled out a single sheet of paper, a photocopy of an old bank statement from our marriage, with a line highlighted in yellow, a $10,000 withdrawal I'd made to cover one of Greg's failed ventures. A note was clipped to the statement, short and blunt. Asterisk, you hid this from the divorce settlement. I could make trouble. Meet me tomorrow, 7 p.m., the Rusty Nail. Let's talk. Asterisk. I stared at the paper, my breath shallow. The withdrawal wasn't a secret. I'd used it to pay off a loan Greg had defaulted on to keep us from losing everything. It was all documented, all legal. But the way he'd framed it, the implication of deceit, made my blood run cold. I knew he was bluffing, or at least I hoped he was. Carla had assured me the divorce settlement was airtight, but Greg had a way of twisting things, of making people doubt. I thought of the photograph, the note, the way he kept circling back like a shark smelling blood. I called Carla, my voice steadier than I felt, and read her the note. She listened, her silence thoughtful, then said, "He's got nothing, Rachel. That withdrawal was disclosed. I have the records. He's trying to scare you into giving him something, probably money. Don't meet him. Let me handle it." I thanked her, relief washing over me, but the unease lingered. I didn't want to meet Greg, didn't want to sit across from him in some dimly lit bar and listen to his manipulations. But part of me wondered if ignoring him would make things worse, if he'd keep digging, keep sending pieces of our past to haunt me. I thought about Dad's words, "Ghosts don't own you," and tried to hold on to them, but they felt slippery, like sand slipping through my fingers, dot dash dash dash. That evening, I drove to Dad's, the envelope tucked in my purse, a weight I couldn't ignore. The sky was a deep indigo, the first stars just visible, and I rolled down the windows, letting the cool air clear my head. When I pulled into his driveway, I saw the surprise before I even got out of the car. The old treehouse, the one he'd built when I was a kid, had been repainted, its wood gleaming under a new coat of forest green. A string of fairy lights hung from the branches, casting a soft glow, and I felt a lump in my throat. A mix of nostalgia and awe. Dad was waiting on the porch, his grin wide, a beer in his hand. "What do you think?" he asked, gesturing to the treehouse. "Figured it needed a little love. For you, and maybe someday for grandkids." I laughed, the sound shaky, and hugged him tightly. "It's perfect," I said, my voice thick. We climbed the ladder together, the wood creaking under our weight, and sat inside, the space smaller than I remembered, but just as magical. The fairy lights twinkled through the window, and I could almost hear my younger self, whispering dreams to the stars. We talked for hours about Mom, about the bank, about the life I was building. I told him about Greg's latest move, the statement, the note. His face hardened, but he didn't interrupt, just listened, his hand resting on the edge of the treehouse window. When I finished, he took a long sip of his beer and said, "He's a small man, Rachel. Always was. You don't owe him a damn thing." I nodded, the truth of it sinking in. Greg wasn't a threat, not really. He was a shadow, a reminder of a life I'd outgrown. I thought about the treehouse, the way Dad had rebuilt it, not because it was necessary, but because it mattered. That was what I was doing too. Rebuilding, not for Greg, not for anyone, but for myself. Dot dash dash dash. The next day, I didn't go to the Rusty Nail. Instead, I sent Carla a copy of the note and the statement, letting her take the lead. She called me that afternoon, her voice brisk. "I sent him a cease and desist letter," she said. "If he contacts you again, we'll file for harassment. He's done, Rachel." I thanked her, a weight lifting, and went back to work, my focus sharp. The bank felt like home now, its rhythms familiar, its people a kind of family. Mia stopped by my office, her eyes bright, and told me about a student who'd thanked her after a workshop, saying it was the first time he'd felt in control of his future. I smiled, thinking of my own journey, the way control had been my lifeline. That evening, I drove to Lisa's place, a cozy townhouse with a backyard full of wildflowers. We sat on her patio, sipping wine, the air cool and sweet. I told her about the treehouse, about Greg's note, about the way Dad's words had steadied me. She listened, her face soft, and when I finished, she raised her glass. To you, Rachel, she said, the woman who keeps rising. We clinked glasses, the sound bright in the quiet night, and I felt something settle in me. A peace, hard won and fragile, but real. Greg was gone, his threats empty, his shadow fading. I thought of Mom, humming in the kitchen, of Dad peeling that orange, of the girl I'd been and the woman I was becoming. My story wasn't over, not by a long shot. It was just beginning, and I was ready to write the next chapter, one page at a time. The fall deepened, and Atlanta settled into that quiet rhythm of shorter days and cooler nights. The bank was a hive of activity, with the financial literacy program expanding to more schools and our nonprofit partnership gaining traction. I'd wake up each morning to the smell of coffee and the soft glow of dawn through my balcony doors, feeling a sense of purpose that anchored me. The orange on my desk had started to soften, its scent fainter now, but I kept it there, a reminder of Dad's visit, of the roots that held me steady. Greg's threats had gone silent after Carla's cease and desist letter. I hadn't heard from him, no notes, no surprise deliveries, and the absence felt like a victory, small but significant. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that he was out there, licking his wounds, waiting for another chance to strike. I tried not to dwell on it, focusing instead on the work, the people, the life I was building. But at night, when the apartment was quiet, I'd catch myself wondering what he was doing, if he'd finally hit rock bottom or if he was still spinning his stories, charming someone new into believing him. One crisp November morning, I was in my office reviewing a grant proposal for the nonprofit when Mia knocked on the door. Her dark hair was pulled into a neat bun, her eyes bright with excitement. Rachel, you've got to see this, she said, holding up her phone. She showed me a video from one of our workshops, a montage of students talking about what they'd learned: how to save, how to avoid debt, how to dream bigger. One girl, maybe 16, looked straight at the camera and said, "This changed how I see my future. I know I can do this now." I watched, my throat tight, and felt a swell of pride. This was why I'd fought so hard, why I'd clawed my way out of the hole Greg had left me in. Not just for me, but for moments like this, for people who needed a hand up the way I had. I looked at Mia, her grin infectious, and said, "You're killing it out there. Keep it up." She blushed, tucking her phone away. "Couldn't have done it without you," she said. And I shook my head, thinking of Mr. Peterson, of Lisa, of Dad, all the people who'd carried me through. Success wasn't a solo act, it was a chain, each link forged by someone who believed in you. Dash, dash, dash. That afternoon, Lisa and I met Karen at a coffee shop downtown, a cozy place with exposed brick walls and the smell of roasted beans. We sat by the window, sunlight streaming through the glass, and went over the details of our partnership. Karen was all business, her gray hair pulled back, her notebook filled with precise handwriting. She told us about a client, a woman named Sarah, who'd left an abusive marriage and was starting over with nothing but a part-time job and 2 kids. "She's smart," Karen said, "but she's scared. Your program could give her the tools to rebuild." I listened, my coffee cooling in my hands, and thought about my own rebuild: the sleepless nights, the endless hustle, the way I'd learned to trust myself again. I wanted Sarah to feel that, to know she wasn't alone. We agreed to set up a tailored financial plan for her, with workshops and one-on-one coaching. As we wrapped up, Karen reached across the table, her hand resting on mine. "You're doing good work, Rachel," she said, her voice warm. "This matters." Driving back to the bank, I felt a quiet satisfaction, the kind that comes from knowing you're exactly where you're meant to be. The city buzzed around me, horns honking, pedestrians weaving through crosswalks, and I thought about Mom, how she'd spent her life helping people, stitching wounds, calming fears. I wasn't a nurse, but maybe this was my way of carrying her forward, of healing in my own way. Dash, dash, dash. That evening, I drove to Dad's for dinner, a ritual that had become my anchor. He'd texted earlier, promising his world-famous chili, which was really just a recipe he'd tweaked over the years, heavy on the beans and light on the spice. I pulled into his driveway, the fairy lights on the treehouse glowing softly, and felt a pang of gratitude for this place, this man, this life. Inside, the kitchen was warm, the air thick with the smell of chili and cornbread. Dad was at the stove, stirring a pot, his flannel shirt rolled up to his elbows. He grinned when he saw me, wiping his hands on a dish towel. "Hope you're hungry," he said, and I laughed, setting my purse on the counter. We ate at the table, the colorful plates a quiet nod to Mom, and talked about the bank, the nonprofit, the treehouse he was thinking of adding a skylight to. I told him about Sarah, about the video Mia had shown me, and he listened, his eyes crinkling with pride. "You're making a difference, kid," he said, scooping chili onto his spoon. "That's what it's all about." I smiled, but my mind drifted to Greg, to the silence that felt too good to be true. I hadn't told Dad about the bank statement, the meeting Greg had demanded. I didn't want to worry him, but sitting there, in the warmth of his kitchen, I felt the need to unburden myself. "Dad," I said, my voice soft, "Greg sent something else. A bank statement from when we were married, trying to make it look like I hid money." "It's nothing. Carla says it's handled," but it shook me. He set his spoon down, his face serious but not surprised. "He's still trying to pull you back," he said. "Men like that, they don't know how to let go, but you're stronger than his games, Rachel. You always have been." I nodded, his words a balm, but the unease lingered. I thought about the orange, still on my desk, and the photograph I'd torn up. I'd thought destroying it would free me, but maybe freedom wasn't that simple. Maybe it was about facing the past, not erasing it, and choosing to move forward anyway, dot dash dash dash. The next morning, I was at the bank early, the sky still dark, the parking lot empty, except for my car. I sat in my office, the orange catching the first rays of sunrise, and opened my laptop. I don't know why I did it, but I searched for Greg online, something I hadn't done in months. His Instagram was still active, but the posts were sparse, the flashy confidence replaced by vague captions about new beginnings. I clicked on a local news article, my heart sinking as I read the headline: Asterisk, local bar files for bankruptcy. Asterisk. It was his bar, the one he'd begged for a loan to save. The article was short, clinical, detailing unpaid debts and a failed lease. There was a photo of Greg outside the bar, his face drawn, his eyes avoiding the camera. I stared at it, waiting for the satisfaction I'd expected, the triumph of seeing him fail. But it didn't come. Instead, I felt a quiet sadness, not for him, but for the life we'd once shared, the dreams that had crumbled under the weight of his choices. I closed the laptop, my hands steady, and picked up the orange, rolling it between my palms. The scent was faint now, almost gone, but it was enough. I thought of Dad peeling fruit at the kitchen table, of Mom humming in the background, of the woman I'd become, scars and all. Greg's failure wasn't my victory. My victory was this office, this bank, the people I was helping, the life I'd built from nothing. Dot dash dash dash. That afternoon, I met Sarah, the woman from the nonprofit. She was in her early 30s, petite, with tired eyes and a nervous smile. We sat in a small conference room sipping coffee, and I walked her through a budget, showing her how to stretch her part-time income, how to start saving. She listened, her hands twisting in her lap, and when we finished, she looked at me, her voice soft. "I didn't think I could do this," she said. "Thank you." I smiled, my heart full, and thought of the girl in that old photograph, the one who'd believed in forever. She was still part of me, but she wasn't all of me. I was Rachel Adams, daughter, friend, survivor, builder. Greg's story was his own now, and I didn't need to read it. Mine was still unfolding, and I was writing it with every choice, every step, every moment of quiet, hard-won peace. Winter crept into Atlanta, the air turning sharp, the trees bare against a slate-gray sky. The bank was decked out for the holidays with a small tree in the lobby, its lights twinkling softly, and garlands draped over the teller counters. I'd always loved this season, the way it brought people together, the way it reminded me of Mom baking cookies, her jazz records spinning in the background. Now, as I walked through the bank each morning, greeting staff and clients, I felt a quiet joy, a sense that I was exactly where I was meant to be. The nonprofit partnership was thriving. Sarah had started attending our workshops regularly, her nervous smile giving way to a cautious confidence. She'd opened a savings account, small but growing, and last week she'd told me about a promotion at her job, her voice bright with pride. "It's not much," she'd said, "but it's mine." I'd nodded, thinking of my own journey, the way each small win had built the foundation for something bigger. I saw myself in her, in the way she carried her pain, but refused to let it define her. Mia was leading more workshops now, her energy infectious, and the financial literacy program had caught the attention of a local news station. They wanted to do a feature on us, spotlighting the bank's community work. I was hesitant at first. Publicity felt like a double-edged sword, especially with Greg's shadow still lingering, but Lisa convinced me. This is your story, Rachel, she said, her eyes fierce. Own it. So we agreed, and the film crew came on a chilly December morning, their cameras and lights transforming the bank into a stage. Mia and I walked them through the program, showing them the classroom where we held workshops, introducing them to students and clients. Sarah was there too, her voice steady as she told the reporter how the program had helped her rebuild. I stood in the background watching, my chest tight with pride. This was what I'd fought for. Not just a bank, but a place that changed lives. The reporter, a young woman with sharp eyes and a quick smile, turned to me at the end. Rachel, you've turned this bank into something special, she said, the camera rolling. What drives you? I paused, my mind flashing to the courtroom, the bills, the nights I'd thought I'd never climb out. I thought of Dad peeling that orange, of Mom's humming, of the orange still on my desk. Its scent long gone, but its meaning enduring. I've been through some dark times, I said finally, my voice calm but firm. I know what it's like to start over. I want this bank to be a place where people can find their way back, where they can build something new. The reporter nodded, satisfied, and the crew packed up, leaving the bank quiet again. Mia squeezed my arm, her grin wide. You nailed it, she said, and I laughed, the tension easing. But as I walked back to my office, I felt a flicker of unease, like I'd just painted a target on my back. Publicity meant exposure, and exposure meant Greg might see it, might feel the need to strike again. Dot dash. Dash dash. That evening, I drove to Lisa's for our weekly wine night. Her townhouse was warm, the patio strung with fairy lights, a fire pit casting a soft glow. We sat outside, bundled in sweaters, sipping Merlot and watching the flames dance. I told her about the news feature, about Sarah, about the way it felt to see the bank's impact. She listened, her blonde hair catching the firelight, and when I finished, she raised her glass. You're a damn inspiration, Rachel, she said. Don't ever forget that. I smiled, but my mind drifted to Greg, to the article I'd read about his bar's bankruptcy. I hadn't told Lisa about it, hadn't wanted to give him more space in my life than he deserved. But sitting there, the wine warm in my hands, I felt the need to unburden myself. I looked him up, I said, my voice low. His bar's gone under. He's not doing well. Lisa's eyes narrowed, but she didn't interrupt. Good, she said finally, her tone sharp. Let him crash and burn. He doesn't get to touch what you've built. I nodded, her words a shield, but I couldn't shake the sadness that had settled in me when I'd seen that article. Not for Greg exactly, but for the life we'd once planned, the one that had slipped through my fingers. I thought of the photograph, torn and discarded, and wondered if I'd ever fully let it go. Not the pain, but the memory of who I'd been. The girl who'd loved so fiercely, trusted so completely, dot dash dash dash. The news feature aired a few days later, and the response was overwhelming. Clients stopped by to congratulate me, emails poured in from community groups, and the bank's phone rang nonstop with inquiries about our programs. I was in a meeting with Tom when my assistant buzzed me, her voice hesitant. Rachel, there's someone here to see you. He says he's an old friend. My heart stuttered, my mind flashing to Greg. I excused myself, my steps measured, and walked to the lobby. But it wasn't Greg. It was Mark, a mutual friend from our marriage, someone I hadn't seen in years. He was shorter than I remembered, his hair thinning, but his smile was warm, familiar. Rachel, he said, stepping forward. I saw you on the news. I just wanted to say I'm proud of you. I blinked, caught off guard, and gestured for him to follow me to my office. We sat across from each other, the orange on my desk a quiet witness. Mark told me about his life. A new job, a divorce of his own, a daughter in college. He'd been close to Greg back then, part of the circle that had drifted away when our marriage imploded. I should have reached out, he said, his voice heavy. After the divorce, I didn't know what to say. I nodded, the old hurt softening. It's okay, I said. It was a mess for everyone. He hesitated, then leaned forward, his hands clasped. I saw Greg a few weeks ago, he said, and my stomach tightened. He's not doing great, Rachel. He's drinking a lot, talking about you, about the bank. He's obsessed, says you ruined him. I sat back, my hands steady, but my pulse racing. He ruined himself, I said, my voice calm but firm. I just refused to go down with him, Mark nodded, his eyes sad. I know, I just thought you should know. Be careful, okay? I thanked him, walking him out, my mind spinning. Greg's obsession wasn't news, but hearing it from Mark made it real, tangible, like a storm cloud on the horizon. I called Carla, updating her, and she promised to keep an eye out, to strengthen the legal barriers. He's got no ground to stand on, she said. You focus on you. That night, I drove to Dad's, needing the comfort of his kitchen, his voice. He was in the backyard, tending a small fire pit, the air smelling of wood smoke and pine. We sat under the stars, the treehouse glowing faintly, and I told him about Mark, about Greg's obsession. He listened, his face unreadable, then handed me a mug of hot cider, its warmth seeping into my hands. He's a ghost, Rachel, he said, his voice steady. He'll haunt you as long as you let him. But you're stronger than that. I sipped the cider, the spice sharp on my tongue, and thought of Mom, of the way she'd faced her own battles. A cancer diagnosis, a long fight, a quiet end. She'd never let fear win, and neither would I. Greg could talk, could obsess, but he couldn't touch me. Not anymore, dot dash, dash, dash. The holidays came and the bank hosted a community event, a toy drive for local families. Sarah helped organize it, her kids running around with tinsel in their hair, their laughter filling the lobby. Lisa brought wine, Dad brought cornbread, and Mia led a group of teens in wrapping gifts. I stood in the corner, watching, my heart full. This was my life now, not Greg's story, not the past, but this moment, these people, this joy dot. As the event wound down, I stepped outside, the air cold, the sky clear. I thought of the orange still on my desk and the photograph, gone but not forgotten. I thought of the woman I'd been, the one who'd loved Greg, and the woman I was now, the one who'd built a bank, a community, a legacy. The past was part of me, but it didn't own me. I was free, not because I'd erased it, but because I'd chosen to keep going, to write a story bigger than the pain dot. The new year arrived quietly with a soft snow dusting Atlanta's streets, a rarity that turned the city into a hushed, glittering wonderland. I stood on my balcony that first morning, a mug of coffee warming my hands, watching the flakes settle on the railing. The air was sharp, clean, and I breathed it in, feeling the promise of a fresh start. The bank was closed for the holiday, and for the first time in months, I had a day to myself, a chance to reflect on the whirlwind of the past year, the triumphs, the challenges, the ghosts I'd finally laid to rest. The toy drive had been a success, raising enough to provide gifts for over 200 families. Sarah had hugged me as we packed up, her eyes shining, and said, "You gave my kids a Christmas they'll never forget." I'd smiled, my throat tight, thinking of my own Christmases as a kid, Mom's cookies cooling on the counter, Dad's off-key rendition of Jingle Bells. Those memories were a foundation, a reminder that love and resilience could carry you through anything. Back at the bank, the news feature had brought a surge of interest. We'd hired 2 new staff members to handle the influx of clients, and Mia was training them, her confidence growing with every session. Lisa and I were planning a second branch, a bold move that felt both terrifying and exhilarating. I'd lie awake at night, crunching numbers in my head, but the fear was tempered by a quiet certainty. I'd built this once, I could do it again. Greg's silence held, and with each passing week, his shadow grew smaller. Carla had assured me he'd backed off, cowed by the cease and desist letter, and Mark's warning felt like a distant echo. Still, I kept my guard up, checking the bank's records, staying vigilant. I didn't think he'd try anything, not really, but I'd learned not to underestimate his desperation. Dash dash dash. One cold January afternoon, I was in my office, the orange now shriveled but still on my desk, when Tom knocked. His face was pale, his glasses fogged from the chilly air outside. "Rachel, you need to see this," he said, holding up his phone. My heart sank, expecting another note, another photograph, but it was a news article, local and brief. Asterisk man arrested for public intoxication outside downtown bar. Asterisk. It was Greg. The article was short, just a paragraph, but the photo was unmistakable. His face haggard, his eyes bloodshot, his hands cuffed behind him. He'd been picked up outside the Rusty Nail, the same bar he'd wanted to meet me at, shouting nonsense about getting even until the cops hauled him away. I read the article twice, my hands steady but my chest tight. I waited for the satisfaction, the closure, but all I felt was a quiet pity, a sadness for the man he'd become. Tom watched me, his expression worried. You okay? He asked, and I nodded, handing back his phone. I'm fine, I said, my voice calm. It's over. And it was. Not because Greg was in a cell, but because I'd let him go, not in a dramatic moment, but in the slow, steady work of rebuilding. The orange on my desk, the bank's hum, the people I'd helped, they were my story now, not him. I called Carla, updating her, and she promised to monitor the situation to ensure Greg stayed away. He's digging his own grave, she said, her voice crisp. You keep shining. I thanked her, a weight lifting, and turned back to my work. The numbers on my screen, a language of possibility. Dash, dash, dash. That evening, I drove to Dad's, the snow melting into slush under my tires. He was in the kitchen making soup, the air thick with the smell of carrots and thyme. The treehouse lights glowed outside, a beacon in the dark, and I felt a rush of gratitude for this place, this man, this life. We ate at the table, the colorful plates a quiet nod to Mom, and I told him about Greg's arrest, about the article, about the pity that had surprised me. Dad listened, his spoon pausing midair, then set it down, his eyes steady. You're not responsible for him, Rachel, he said. You never were. He made his choices, same as you made yours. I nodded, his words a truth I'd fought to accept. I thought of the courtroom, the bills, the nights I'd blamed myself for Greg's failures. I'd carried that guilt for too long, but now, sitting in Dad's kitchen, I felt it slip away, light as a snowflake melting on my skin. We talked late into the night about Mom, about the bank, about the skylight he was still determined to add to the treehouse. For the stars, he said, his grin boyish, and I laughed, picturing us up there, looking at the sky like we had when I was a kid. Before I left, he hugged me, his arms strong, and said, You're my hero, kid. Don't forget it. Driving home, the city quiet under a blanket of snow, I felt a peace I hadn't known was possible. The past was there, always would be, but it was just a chapter, not the whole book. I thought of the orange, of the photograph, of the woman I'd been, and the woman I was now. I'd built something real, something lasting, and no one, not Greg, not anyone, could take that away. Dash, dash, dash. The weeks that followed were a blur of progress. The second branch was approved, a small space in a neighboring suburb, and Lisa and I spent hours planning its layout, its programs, its heart. Sarah enrolled in a community college course, her kids cheering her on, and Mia was promoted to program director, her pride palpable. The bank felt like a living thing, growing, breathing, changing lives. One sunny February morning, I was in my office, the orange now a dry husk, when a package arrived. It was small, wrapped in plain paper, my name written in unfamiliar handwriting. My heart skipped, expecting another ghost, but when I opened it, I found a handwritten card and a small polished stone, smooth and gray, like something from a riverbed. The card was from Sarah. Asterisk. Thank you for seeing me, it read. Asterisk. This stone was my mom's. She said it was for strength. I want you to have it. I held the stone, its weight cool in my palm, and felt my eyes sting. I thought of my own mom, of the orange, of the countless small gifts that had carried me through. I set the stone next to the orange, a new talisman, a reminder of the lives I'd touched, the chain of strength that stretched beyond me. Dash, dash, dash. That evening, I drove to Lisa's, the stone in my pocket, the card tucked in my purse. We sat on her patio, the air warming with the first hints of spring, and I told her about Sarah's gift, about the second branch, about the peace that had settled in me. She listened, her eyes soft, and when I finished, she leaned forward, her voice fierce. You're not just surviving, Rachel, she said. You're thriving, and that's the best revenge. I smiled. The word asterisk, revenge asterisk, feeling small now, insignificant. It wasn't about Greg, not anymore. It was about me, about the bank, about Sarah and Mia and Dad and Lisa. It was about the life I'd built, the love I'd found, the strength I'd claimed. I raised my glass, the wine catching the light, and toasted to that, to thriving, to new beginnings, to a story that was mine to write. As we drank, the stars came out, bright against a velvet sky, and I thought of the treehouse, of Dad's skylight, of the girl I'd been, dreaming under those same stars. She was still there, part of me, but I was more now, bigger, stronger. The past was a river flowing behind me, and I was standing on the shore, ready for whatever came next. The stars hung low over Lisa's patio, their light steady, unwavering, like a promise kept. I leaned back in my chair, the wine glass cool in my hand, the stone from Sarah a gentle weight in my pocket. Lisa's words echoed in my mind. Thriving, not just surviving. And I felt them settle into me, a truth I'd been carrying but hadn't fully named. The fire pit crackled, its warmth pushing back the early spring chill, and for a moment, I let myself just be. Let the world hold me without asking for anything in return. Spring unfolded slowly, the days growing longer, the air softening with the scent of blooming jasmine. The bank was a whirlwind of activity, the second branch taking shape in a modest building with big windows and a sign that read Asterisk Adams Community Bank Asterisk in bold, clean letters. I'd walk the construction site some evenings, my heels sinking into the soft earth, watching workers lay brick and frame walls. It felt like watching myself rebuild piece by piece, the way I had after the divorce. Lisa would join me sometimes, her laughter bright as she teased me about my empire. But it wasn't an empire, not really. It was a legacy, a place where people could find hope, the way I had. Sarah's progress was a quiet triumph. She'd started night classes, studying business management, and her kids would show up at the bank sometimes, their backpacks bouncing as they ran to show me their drawings. "This is you," her daughter said once, holding up a crayon sketch of a woman with auburn hair and a big smile, standing in front of a building with a dollar sign on it. I laughed, tucking the drawing into my desk drawer next to Sarah's stone, the shriveled orange, and the memory of a photograph I'd let go. Those small tokens were my anchors, reminders of the people who'd shaped me, the ones I was shaping in return. Mia was thriving too, her role as program director giving her a confidence that lit up every room. She'd come to me one morning, her eyes nervous but determined, and asked to lead the second branch's community programs. "I want to do what you've done," she said, her voice steady. "Make a difference." I'd nodded, pride swelling in my chest, and promised her the job. She was me, in a way, but her own woman, too, forging a path I had only dreamed of at her age. Dad was a constant. His dinners a ritual I guarded fiercely. We'd sit in his backyard, the treehouse glowing, and talk about everything, his garden, my plans, the skylight he'd finally installed. "You can see Orion now," he'd said, pointing to the stars. And I'd climbed up with him one night, lying on a blanket, feeling like a kid again. The stars were bright, endless, and I thought of Mom, of her voice saying, "You're going to do big things, Rachel." I was doing them, not for her, not for anyone, but because they mattered, because they were mine. Greg's absence was a relief, but it wasn't peace, not entirely. I'd see his face sometimes, in a stranger's profile at a coffee shop, in a fleeting shadow on the street, and my heart would skip, a reflex I couldn't unlearn. Carla had assured me he was gone, his arrest a wake-up call that had sent him scrambling, but I knew him too well. He wasn't the type to disappear quietly. I didn't fear him, not anymore, but I braced for him. The way you brace for a storm you know is coming, huh? It came on a rainy April afternoon, the sky heavy, the bank quiet except for the patter of drops against the windows. I was in my office, reviewing a loan application when my assistant buzzed me. "There's someone here," she said, her voice tight. "He says it's urgent. It's Greg Adams." My breath caught, but I didn't hesitate. "Send him in," I said, my voice calm, my hands steady as I closed the file. I stood, smoothing my blazer, and waited, the stone in my pocket a quiet weight, the orange on my desk a faded but stubborn symbol. The door opened, and there he was, not the Greg of our marriage, not even the Greg of our last meeting, but a man diminished, his suit wrinkled, his eyes hollow, his charm stripped away. "Rachel," he said, his voice rough like he hadn't slept in days. He didn't sit, just stood there, rain dripping from his hair onto the carpet. "I need to talk to you." I looked at him, really looked, and saw not a threat, not a ghost, but a man who'd lost everything, his bar, his pride, his story. I gestured to the chair, but he shook his head, his hands clenching at his sides. "I'm leaving Atlanta," he said, the words rushed like they burned. I needed to see you first." I didn't speak, didn't move, just let him fill the silence. He paced, a short, jerky movement, then stopped, his eyes meeting mine. "I messed up, Rachel," he said, his voice breaking. "I know that. I left you with nothing, and I'm sorry." The words hung there, heavy, unexpected. I waited for the anger, the triumph, but all I felt was a quiet detachment, like I was watching a play I'd already seen. "Why are you here, Greg?" I asked, my voice even, almost gentle. He swallowed, his Adam's apple bobbing. I saw you on the news, he said. The bank, the programs, all of it. I saw what you've done, and I wanted to say I'm proud of you, and I'm sorry for everything. I studied him, searching for the lie, the manipulation. But his eyes were raw, unguarded, like a man who'd run out of masks. I thought of the courtroom, the bills, the nights I'd cried myself to sleep. I thought of the photograph, the bank statement, the threats he'd sent. And I thought of Dad, peeling that orange, saying, "Asterisk, you don't stay down." Greg's apology didn't erase the pain, didn't undo the years, but it was something. A crack in the armor he'd worn so long. "Thank you," I said finally, my voice steady. "But I don't need your pride, Greg. I needed your partnership, and you couldn't give it. I've built this without you, and I'll keep building." He flinched, but he nodded, his shoulders slumping. "I know," he said. I had to say it." He turned to leave, then paused, his hand on the door. "You're better than I ever was, Rachel. You always were." The door clicked shut behind him, and I stood there, the rain drumming against the windows, the office silent. I waited for the rush of a victory, but it didn't come. Instead, I felt a quiet release, like a knot untying itself. Greg wasn't my enemy anymore, wasn't my ghost. He was just a man, broken by his own choices, and I was free. Not because he'd apologized, but because I'd chosen to let him go. I sat down, my hands brushing the orange, the stone, the desk that held my story. I thought of the girl I'd been, the one who'd loved him, trusted him, and I didn't hate her anymore. She'd been brave in her own way, and she'd led me here to this moment, this life. I picked up the orange, its husk crumbling in my fingers, and set it gently in the trash. It had served its purpose, carried me through. Now I had the stone, Sarah's gift, a new symbol of strength, dot dash, dash, dash. The months that followed were a blur of growth. The second branch opened in June, a sunny day with balloons and a ribbon cutting ceremony. Sarah was there, her kids clapping as I cut the ribbon, her smile wide. Mia led the first workshop that afternoon, her voice ringing with confidence, and Lisa stood beside me, her arm around my shoulders. "Look at you, Rachel," she whispered. "Look at what you've done." Dad was there too, his grin boyish, his hands stuffed in his pockets. He'd brought a new orange, fresh and bright, and set it on the branch's front desk, a quiet nod to our history. We climbed the treehouse that night, the skylight framing a sky full of stars, and he told me stories about Mom, about the early days of their marriage, the way she'd laughed through the hard times. "You've got her heart," he said, his voice soft, and I leaned against him, my eyes stinging, feeling her presence in the warmth of his words. Greg was gone, truly gone. Carla told me he'd moved to Florida, chasing another scheme, another chance to rewrite his story. I didn't follow him, didn't need to. His defeat wasn't in his arrest, his bankruptcy, or even his apology. It was in his irrelevance, in the way my life had grown beyond him. A river too wide for him to cross. He'd lost, not because I'd crushed him, but because I'd thrived. My success a mirror he couldn't face. Dot dash dash dash. By summer, I was different, not in a loud way, but in the quiet shifts that matter most. I laughed easier, slept deeper, trusted myself without question. The bank was my home, but so was Dad's kitchen, Lisa's patio, the treehouse under the stars. I started painting again, a hobby I'd abandoned during my marriage, filling canvases with bold colors, abstract shapes that felt like freedom. I'd sit on my balcony some evenings, a canvas propped against the railing, the city humming below, and feel a peace that was mine, hard won and whole. Sarah graduated from her program, her kids cheering as she walked across the stage, and I was there, clapping until my hands hurt. Mia took on more responsibility, her ideas shaping the bank's future, and I mentored her, not as a boss, but as a friend. Lisa and I planned a third branch, dreaming big, unafraid. And Dad, always Dad, kept his garden growing, his treehouse glowing, his love a constant I could lean into. One August evening, I drove to the park where Mom used to push me on the swings. The air was warm, the sky streaked with pink and gold, the swings creaking softly in the breeze. I sat on one, the chains cool under my hands, and closed my eyes, remembering her laugh, her voice, the way she'd made every moment feel like enough. I took the stone from my pocket, its surface smooth from months of touch, and held it up to the light, a small, perfect thing. I didn't need to carry the pain anymore, didn't need to fight the past. I was Rachel Adams, daughter, friend, builder, survivor. My story was mine, written in every choice, every scar, every sunrise. I slipped the stone back into my pocket, pushed off the swing, and walked into the fading light, my steps steady, my heart full dot. And as the stars began to appear, I whispered to the sky, I'm still here.